So you come back and you're like, I'm sucked in. I got to watch the next season. So you wait all summer and you come and you're like, okay, what's going to happen? This has really gotten bad. Is it fixable? How's it going to be resolved? The plot is real. The plot is real. God created it good. God wanted to dwell with his people, but it's all messed up. It's all messed up. So you turn on your TV and you get ready and, oh, who's he? Abe. What's Abe doing? Who's he? Why is Abe so important? And this guy, Abraham, just starts off, the first episode just introduces Abraham, and you start thinking, who's this guy? And you see that God just grabs him. You don't know anything really about him. You don't know why he's grabbed. You don't know why he's targeted, but God targets Abraham. And he says to him, Abraham, go, leave your family and go to a land that I'm going to show you. And I'm going to bless your socks off. I'm going to rock your world, and your name's going to be known for all generations. Your name's going to be great. And I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to bless those who bless you. I'm going to curse those who curse you. And through you, all the families of the earth are going to be blessed. All righty then, there's hope. You're excited. Maybe there's redemption in this story after all. So you get excited, and God made this promise to Abraham, and then you read, and okay, let me give you a little trivia question, you Bible scholars. You ever thought about this? I'm a Christian, and I love to use this term. I'm born again. I'm not ashamed to say it. I'm born again. I was dead. I was on drugs and alcohol, and then God gave me a new life, and I became born again. Did you know Abraham was born again? Does anybody know this? Abraham was born again. So this isn't something new with Christians. This goes back to the father of faith, Father Abraham. What do I mean by that? Well, in Genesis 15, and if you mark your Bibles, Genesis 15 is one of those chapters you really should spend time in. It's a very important chapter. Why? Well, I'm not going to explain the whole chapter, but I'm going to explain it, but I'm only going to show you two parts. Verse 6. It says, Abraham believed the Lord, and God counted to him as righteousness. His sins were forgiven. He's counted as righteous. Why? Because Abraham did good works? Because Abraham was willing to offer his son? No. This comes all before all that. He believed. He believed, and Abraham becomes born again. And 3 times that verse, Genesis 15:6, is quoted in the New Testament. It's a very important verse. And then right after it, you have this bizarre story. It's one of those episodes you watch almost horrified going, this is really weird. God tells Abraham, hey, go get some animals, okay? Let's cut them in half. That's unusual. I don't know what you do, but he goes, cuts them in half and places them down. And then Abraham has a dream. And during the dream, God appears as a smoking fire and pot. And he comes through and this fire passes through those cut animals. And then Abraham wakes up. That's a dream, okay? I don't know what was going on, but we do know what was going on. Because afterwards, we learn that that's the way in the ancient Near East culture, they made covenants that way. This was, to take an animal, which would be like empty your bank account, because an animal was the most precious commodity, and they took those animals and they were willing to sacrifice, they were willing to put their money on the line, their animals, and put it there, and they'd walk through it as like a treaty symbol. And at the end of it, God says, on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your offspring, I will give this land from the river Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. Now, who made the covenant? God made the covenant. And you're watching this going, God's going to do this. He's the main character. He's the hero of the story. He's the initiator. He makes the covenant. It doesn't say that Abraham, in fact, Abraham doesn't just look like pass through the animals. Only God did. This is what we call an unconditional covenant. And I'm watching this fascinated going, this is it. God's going to do it through Abraham and his family and his descendants. He promised it. This main character, either this is going to be a really bad story when we find out this main character really duped us all, or he's going to keep his promise. This is how the story goes. And so he goes on, and we have what's called the patriarch. Abraham has his son, right? He has one son, right? No, he has 2. Good. A couple of you are still awake. That's great. Ishmael and Isaac, but only one of them receives the same promise that Abraham did. Isaac. Isaac's the son of the promise. Now, Abraham had one son also, right? No, Isaac had how many sons? 2. The twins, Jacob and Esau. But God chose, and Romans 9 tells us in this wild passage that God didn't choose Esau, he chose Jacob to pass the blessing on to. God's sovereign choice. Why Jacob? Why not? I don't know. Ask him in heaven. But he does. And if you know the story, Jacob gets the promise. He doesn't have 2 sons like dad and granddad. He's a little more fertile, I guess. He has 12. And they change his name to Israel. And you're watching, and these episodes just get weird. Jacob's wrestling with God. Jacob's going up a ladder and seeing angels. Angels are coming down from ladders. It's just these wild stories, but the promise is still going through, and you just keep waiting. Okay, it's not through Abraham. It's not through Isaac. It's not through Jacob. Well, who's it going to be? I don't know, but God promised, so this is how the story's going to end. But this is going longer. This whole season's going longer than I planned. That's what we call the patriarchs, the fathers. Now, if you've read Genesis, you're reading these stories, but then which child does the blessing get passed on to of Jacob's? Which of his 12 sons does the blessing go to? It doesn't. It goes to all of them. The 12 tribes of Israel receive the promise. Not one is chosen. And then, if you've read Genesis, it takes a twist. And let me ask you a question. It's a very good question. Now, I want you to think story, okay? 13 chapters, beginning in chapter 37, 13 chapters are devoted to Joseph. Now, you New Testament people want to run quickly to because of Jesus. No. There's one bizarre story, and you want to talk about a weird episode. This is like the PG-13, bordering on what is it, TA? I don't watch TV, so what is it, TMA? 18 or whatever, mature something? Isn't it something like that? Anyways, update me. I got to get real with things. But anyways, there's an episode that's pretty racy. Chapter 38, Judah has a daughter-in-law who dresses as a prostitute so she can sleep with her father-in-law to keep the family line going. Whoa, come on, guys, that's just weird. I don't care what you say. I lived in the Middle East for 12 years. I worked with Muslims for a lot. The Muslims hate stories like that in the Bible. How can you make a patriarch look so bad? And it's just kind of a gnarly story. Why is it in there? Well, because we know Jesus comes from the line of Judah, and we'll get to that later, but only one chapter. 13 are devoted to the whole story of Joseph, and you know the story of Joseph. He goes down, Egypt, he's sold and enslaved by his brothers, did him wrong, but he rises up, becomes second to Pharaoh and all that. But let me ask you, what does that have to do with the story? Why are 13 chapters devoted to Joseph? Well, it's so preachers have something to preach today, because they always preach on Joseph. How many of you heard a story on Joseph? Yeah. How many of you heard a story on Judah in chapter 38? Yeah, you don't hear that on Sunday morning. Let me tell you that right now. Because how does Genesis 50 end? The last chapter, it's the last episode of the season. It's the season finale. And Jacob's going to come down, and the family's all coming down to see Joseph, and Joseph forgives them and shows grace, and you're like, this is a happy episode. I'm so thrilled, and you're all happy, and then all of a sudden, as this show fades and the lights go out, and you sit there and you think, wait a minute, what are they doing in Egypt? God promised the land up in Palestine. That's what he promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What's the family doing? How are they going to fulfill it? I don't understand. I got to wait all summer for this? So you get ready. Here it is, the fall season. You get ready, and you watch. It's ready for the new episode. It's going to be good. You turn it on. First episode. Oh, no. There's a king who rises up who knows not Joseph. Now they're slaves. God promised Abraham good things. He promised his descendants to be blessed. They're going to be not only blessed, they're going to be blessings to others. What are they doing in slavery? This story's just taking twists that I don't understand. How's he going to bless them when they're slaves? Oh. Let me ask you a question. We know Abraham became born again. Did you ever think about this? When does the nation Israel become born again? What brought them out of slavery into freedom? What brought them out of death into life? The Passover Lamb. God gave the Passover Lamb to redeem Israel out of slavery and bring them to the promised land. And that's where, as a collective whole, Israel receives the blessing of God, the promise of God. And God brings them out of that slavery and sets them free. And you know the great stories of Exodus with the 10 plagues and the Red Sea parting. And God's bringing his people back, and he takes them to Mount Sinai. And then God does an amazing thing. Another covenant is made. God says to Israel, now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among the peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. He goes on and says, then Moses took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the blood and threw it on the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with these words. Another covenant. But it's not like the other covenant. There's something different here. What's different about this covenant than the one he made with Abraham? This is a conditional covenant. They have to obey to receive the blessing. They have to walk in the words of God in order to receive this blessing. And Israel says, we're going to do it. And you're like, okay, they're going to do it. They're going to the promised land. They're going to get to the promised land. And hopefully the season's going to end. And the series actually is going to end because I'm confused and I can't take any more. Now, how many of you have read Exodus? Now, the plagues, right? The 10 plagues and the whole Passover. It's exciting stuff, right? Mount Sinai and the striking of the rock and God, and all those stories of Exodus are really great. But I'm pretty sure if you've read Exodus, around chapter 25, things changed for you. And you went from reading like, well, this is good, to, oh, they were building a tent. And they were to make the fabric purple. And they were to cover it in porpoise skin. And use acacia wood, whatever that kind of wood is. Or this version says gopher wood. I didn't know gopher wood. I don't get that. I'm just going over to the New Testament. Okay, isn't that what we do? We skip from 25 to 40, almost all those chapters in Exodus are devoted to building a tent. Really? Really, God? Is that the best episodes we can do? Is tent building 101? I'm getting bored with this story. Until I realize what's the purpose. Why is it so important? Because God says to his people Israel, let them make me a sanctuary that I may, what? Dwell in their midst. Do you remember the story? What's Genesis 1 through 3 about? 1 and 2 about? God's where? In the garden, dwelling with his people. What happens in chapter 3? They're kicked out. God's no longer dwelling with his people. What's going to happen now? God's going to dwell with his people. Boys, we better get things fixed and looking good. God's coming to town, okay? There's a reason to build a tabernacle and to make it look good. This isn't just some boring stuff. We've got the living God who's going to come and he's going to dwell in it. So they're building and it's got to be perfect because you got to remember, God doesn't dwell in dirt. You just need to... He redeems the dirt, but he doesn't dwell with it. He wants things nice. And he's very precise on the details he gives. And this tabernacle is amazing. Overlaid with gold, finest material. And then when it's all said and done, you come to one of the most important chapters of the books of Moses. It says, then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, that's the tabernacle, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. God is in their midst. And it's so powerful that Moses wasn't even able to go in it. Because, again, don't miss this phrase, the glory of the Lord is there. All right. God's dwelling with his people again. But they're not there yet. The story can't, and I know it can't because I remember that episode where he told Abraham, you're going to have this land. But if he gets them to the land and he's in their presence and here are his people, we can end this show. We're almost there. Oh, this is exciting. Whoa, this is exciting. I can't wait to come back the next night. I'm going to watch the next episode. Here they are. They're on the edge of the promised land. They're going to go spy it out. They're going to go in. They're going to take it. It's all going to be there. Woo! And then we come to one of those chapters that just mess with our minds. Really, guys? It really? You know the story. He sends out 12 spies, and they come back. If you ever read the Bible, the majority's never good. If you're with the majority, question yourself. 10 of them like, we're not going in there. There's some big dudes in there. They're going to mess us up. Joshua and Caleb, they're like the BAs, man. We're going in. We got God. What are we worried about? But the people listen. They listen to the majority. And here, on the edge of going in the land with God in their midst to fulfill the promises, to conclude the show, we're right back to square one. Another long summer. I gotta wait for the next episode.